Room 307. Chapter 6. The third floor. 3:02 a.m. The footsteps continued for several seconds after the sound of the closing door had faded, each one measured and unhurried, as though whoever was walking above them had absolutely no reason to conceal their presence. They crossed the length of the third floor corridor with a steady rhythm before stopping somewhere directly above the reception desk, where the silence that followed seemed somehow heavier than the sound itself. Nobody in the lobby dared speak first. The grandfather clock resumed its gentle ticking, the fire crackled quietly within the stone fireplace, and rain continued whispering against the windows exactly as it had all evening. Yet every familiar sound now seemed strangely distant, overwhelmed by the expectation that another footstep might arrive at any moment. Liam finally broke the silence. "Please tell me someone else heard that." "I don't think anybody could have missed it," Sophie replied, her voice remaining impressively calm despite the tension that had settled across the room. Daniel instinctively moved closer to Chloe, whose grip on his arm had tightened without either of them noticing. "There's somebody upstairs," Chloe said quietly. "There has to be." Ethan continued looking toward the staircase. "The receptionist said there wasn't an emergency?" "He did," Sophie agreed. "And he didn't seem surprised by the alert." "No, but those footsteps," Ethan continued. "He wasn't expecting those." Margaret nodded slowly. "I've been watching him since we came downstairs." "So have I." "When he looked at those clocks," she said, lowering her voice even further, "that wasn't confusion. It was fear." The words escaped Ethan before he had fully realized he was going to say them. Margaret looked at him. "Yes." For the first time since the emergency alert had appeared, somebody employed by the hotel had looked genuinely frightened. That detail unsettled Ethan more than anything else. If the receptionist understood what was happening, then perhaps the situation was already far beyond anything the guest could hope to control. The receptionist remained standing behind the desk, although the effortless composure he had displayed throughout the evening had begun to crack almost imperceptibly. His shoulders were still perfectly straight and his uniform remained immaculate. But he no longer looked like a man calmly welcoming guests into an expensive country hotel. Instead, he resembled somebody trying very hard to convince himself that routine still existed. Sophie approached the desk once again. "You said they were early." The receptionist said nothing. "You weren't speaking to us, were you?" Silence. "You were speaking to yourself." He closed his eyes briefly before answering. "I would strongly recommend that everyone returns to their rooms." Daniel laughed in disbelief. "We've already tried that." "No," the receptionist replied quietly. "You've left your rooms. Returning is still an option." Liam folded his arms. "You're asking us to ignore whatever's walking around upstairs?" "I'm asking you to stay alive." The sentence landed heavily. Nobody attempted to dismiss it as another of the man's peculiar remarks. It had been delivered too sincerely. Ethan stepped closer. "You know what's happening, don't you?" "I know enough." "Then tell us." "I can't." "There you go again," Ethan replied. "You keep saying you can't." The receptionist looked directly into his eyes. "If I tell you certain things before you experience them yourselves, events have a habit of changing." Nobody spoke. The sentence sounded absurd, yet something about the receptionist's expression prevented anybody from laughing. Liam eventually shook his head. "I've no idea what that means." "I know, so explain it." "I can't." Sophie sighed softly. "I don't think we're going to get any further." A sudden metallic clang echoed somewhere deeper inside the hotel. The sound resembled a lift door closing, although nobody remembered pressing the call button. Everyone turned instinctively towards the corridor leading to the lifts. Nothing happened. Several long seconds passed before another sound followed. The lift bell chimed once, softly, politely, exactly as it had earlier that evening. Except nobody was waiting for the lift. Liam looked towards Ethan. "Did someone call it?" "I didn't." "Neither did I." Daniel looked towards the receptionist. The receptionist did not even glance in the direction of the sound. Instead, he quietly lowered his head, almost as though he already knew what would happen next. The lift bell chimed again. This time the doors could be heard sliding open. The sound traveled clearly through the otherwise silent hotel. Nobody emerged. Nobody approached. After several seconds, the doors slid closed once more. The bell remained silent. No one moved. Finally, Sophie spoke. "I think we should go and look." Chloe immediately shook her head. "I don't." Daniel squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I don't really want to either." "We can't stay here forever," Sophie replied gently. "If there are staff elsewhere in the building, we need to find them. And if there aren't," Sophie hesitated, "then we need to understand why." The group walked together toward the lift corridor, remaining close enough that shoulders occasionally brushed as they moved. Earlier that evening, the hotel had felt spacious and welcoming. Now every corner seemed capable of concealing something they could neither explain nor predict. The corridor itself appeared perfectly ordinary. Cream wallpaper, dark wooden skirting boards, framed paintings, fresh flowers standing upon a polished oak table. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked abandoned. The lift doors stood closed. Above them, the illuminated floor indicator displayed a single number. Liam frowned. "I thought the lift wasn't working." "So did I," Ethan replied. Sophie pressed the call button. The light immediately illuminated. A quiet mechanical hum answered from above. The lift was moving, descending. Nobody spoke while they listened. The machinery seemed unusually loud now that the hotel itself had fallen silent, each gradual movement of cables and gears echoing faintly through the shaft behind the walls. The indicator changed. Then, the lift stopped. The doors remained closed. Nobody had stepped inside. Nobody had stepped out. The indicator continued glowing steadily. Ethan frowned. "It should have opened." "It should," Sophie agreed. Instead, the machinery started again. The lift continued descending. Ground. With a final metallic click, the doors slowly slid apart. The lift stood empty. Completely empty. Its polished brass handrails reflected the warm ceiling lights exactly as they had earlier that evening, while the old timber paneling appeared untouched by time. No luggage, no forgotten belongings, no sign that anybody had been inside. Only one thing appeared unusual. A small brass room key rested neatly in the center of the floor. Nobody remembered seeing it earlier. Liam looked towards Ethan. "You've got longer arms." "I'm not sure that's how volunteering works." "It is tonight." Ethan cautiously stepped forward. The lift remained perfectly still. He bent down and picked up the key. It felt unexpectedly cold. The attached brass fob was considerably older than the one hanging from the key to room 214. Years of use had worn its edges smooth, and the engraved numbers had darkened almost to black. He turned it over. The lobby fell silent once again. Engraved into the brass were 3 simple numbers. Nobody said a word for several seconds. Even the receptionist had left the safety of his desk. He stared at the key with an expression Ethan had not seen before. It wasn't merely fear, it was recognition. Very quietly, almost beneath his breath, the receptionist whispered, "It hasn't done that before." Ethan looked towards him. "What hasn't?" The receptionist continued staring at the key. "When I told you that room 307 was reserved," he paused, his voice suddenly sounding far older than before. "I wasn't expecting it to begin handing out the keys.